So about a week ago, UFC bantamweight Cory Sandhagen had yet another main event fight, yet another main event victory, as he managed to secure a technical knockout victory against China's Song Yadong. Song looked absolutely amazing in that fight at times. I think that if he had managed to get that fight to a decision in the end, if he hadn't cut his eye open like that, I think that it's possible that could have had a different result. But Song Yadong is for real. But I'm not actually here today to talk about Song Yadong. I'm here to talk about Cory Sandhagen. As the lead up to that fight progressed, there were some actually very interesting developments that came out about Cory Sandhagen. And I suppose maybe it's not right to say that they had just come out in the lead up to that fight. It turns out that they were actually, a few weeks or months old, and I only learned about them in the lead up to that fight. But Ariel Helwani did an interview with Cory Sandhagen in which he talked about some very interesting Instagram posts that Cory Sandhagen had made during the summer. And it turns out that Cory Sandhagen, this fighter that for a lot of people, he had a reputation of almost being a borderline psychopath. It actually turns out that Cory Sandhagen has developed a really deep spiritual and philosophical side. Something that really a lot of people didn't see coming. I mean, he was, one of these guys that was kind of credited with being the kind of fighter that just wanted to go in and just hurt the other guy and get him out of there and get his victory. But as it turns out, Cory Sandhagen has been trying to really, engender a softer and more sensitive side of himself that's really kind of developed in a really fascinating way. And so the post in particular, one of the more interesting ones, it was basically kind of a commentary on what it's like to, if a UFC fighter is actually going to be, not a psychopath, he's actually going to be like a real, like a real person. You kind of have to embrace kind of a duality in life, that kind of career choice basically, kind of engineers into somebody's life. And so on the one hand, he has to be, what the fans expect of him. He has to be the fighter, he has to be the killer. He has to go in there and just focus on knocking somebody out, getting a victory, hurting somebody, and collecting his paycheck and walking out of there with the purse. But obviously, if he wants to have any kind of a realistic or decent life outside of fighting, you can't live like that all the time. If he wants to have like an actual family life, there's got to be another side. There has to be a more human person who is more hospitable to actually maintaining and developing the kinds of relationships that a person has to have in order to be able to live a full life. So unless you're looking for a UFC roster that's just full of like the Sean Strickland types, where it's just, they're just going there to hurt somebody and walk away with their money, there has to be a lot more than that. And so in this interview that he had given with Ariel Helwani, he talked about how he engendered this side of himself. And in particular, he brought up a book by an academic by the name of Ram Dass. And Ram Dass is, in some regards, a very interesting sort of figure on his own. He was formerly an academic, and then he walked away from the field for a while, and he basically went on a spiritual journey, and he had himself a guru somewhere. Now, honestly, I'm not a huge fan of gurus, even just the idea of gurus. It's engendering a lot of power into somebody who often has really, really shaky, squishy kind of ideas with few real-world applications. But in particular, this guy in this book did kind of come up with some that I think were very interesting for a UFC fighter. And as a matter of fact, I think would actually be useful, not just for most UFC fighters, but really for most people. And so in this book, Ram Dass talks about, sitting down and having these long conversations with his guru. And he would try to tell him about things that had gone on in his life. And he would say, something like, this one time, this thing happened. He's trying to tell this story. And the guru would just turn to him and he would say, just be here now. And that's actually the title of the book, Be Here Now. And he would tell him, it's like, no, it's okay. Just save your story. Just be here now. And so the idea kind of gets explored a little bit. And what they actually talk about is the way that we very rarely, as people, quite often, we don't live in the moment that we're in. Because often the moment that we're in, it might be a good deal more uncomfortable than what we're willing to embrace, at the time, or sometimes ever. And so in the book, he talks about the way that we armor ourselves against the pain of the world. And yeah, there's a lot of things that we would want to armor ourselves against, and not just in our own lives, but also in the world as a whole. In particular in the book, he talks about how, there's poverty in the world, and there are children that go hungry. And if you stop and you think about that, it will make you very sad. Even if it doesn't engender in you I'm using that word a lot today, engender. Even if it doesn't inspire in you, a determination to do something about it, then it will, it'll make you pretty sad. And so he talks about how we put these kind of layers over ourselves to armor ourselves against these things. And in this book, he basically tells people, it's like, no, it's like that's not the healthy way to do it. It's like you need to, you need to strip away all of this emotional armor that you've been taught your whole life, to kind of amass over yourself, so that you can feel these things in the moment. Instead of trying to armor yourself against them in the moment and put them off into a later time when you're ready to, when you're actually ready to deal with them. Be here now. Deal with whatever it is that is before you. Deal with it now. And as it pertains to fighting, and martial arts in particular, there is an absolutely fascinating intersection of those ideas with the ideas of Matsumoto. So for anybody who might not know who Matsumoto is, Matsumoto was basically, he was a Japanese swordsman. He wrote a book called The Book of Five Rings. And one of the teachings in that book, there's so much in it that a person couldn't possibly get to all of it in one time or one place. But the one today that is especially interesting is his teaching that pain is cyclical. Pain is cyclical, but it is also finite. And so something will happen to you, you feel that pain, but then it goes away. Like you feel that pain in the moment, but then it goes away. And then something else can happen, but then in future that pain might come back, but even then the pain is finite, it is cyclical, it happens, and then it's gone. And that is of obvious import when you consider what it is that Ram Dass was trying to teach with his book. Because when you think about it, what you're trying to armor yourself against, when you're trying to armor yourself against the pain of life and the pain of the world, is that you're armoring yourself against something that is cyclical and finite. Armoring yourself against it in the moment isn't going to stop it from ever coming back again. But if you strip away that armor and you deal with it in the moment, you'll at least be much better equipped to deal with it when it does come back in future. And for anybody who chooses the path of a professional fighter, that's going to happen to them hundreds of times in a single day, let alone hundreds of times in their career. If you choose the role of a professional fighter, if you choose that path, you're going to get punched thousands of times over the span of your career. And it's going to hurt every time that you get hit. Hell, that's true of anybody that just goes down to like the neighborhood dojo to take karate lessons as a kid. You're going to get hit hundreds, thousands of times during the course of that. It's going to hurt every time. And you can either live with the fear of that pain, in your mind for the entirety of your life, or you can just accept it, deal with it, and move on. And Cory Sandhagen, he has definitely experienced that over the course of his life. He's experienced that over the course of training for just a single fight. But they also experience it in different ways over the course of their career. And over the last year or so, Cory Sandhagen, he has definitely experienced that. I mean, when Aljamain Sterling got injured last year and was unable to defend the Bantamweight Championship of the world against Peter Yan, the UFC made a decision to establish the interim Bantamweight Championship, and they had Cory Sandhagen contest that against Peter Yan. That was a huge opportunity for Cory Sandhagen. Because if he won, not only would he be the Bantamweight champion, the interim Bantamweight champion, but he would earn himself a rematch with Aljamain Sterling, who was another fighter that managed to defeat him, give him one of those setbacks, those, that bit of pain that a person has to be able to overcome. But for the vast majority of fighters in the world, is a pain that they will experience numerous times throughout their career. They will experience defeat. They will need a way to come through it. And if they armor themselves against every little defeat, the way that, say, Sean O'Malley has done, to not allow themselves, to feel that, then they won't be prepared for it the next time that it comes around. So as it turns out in the end, be here now is kind of a crucial lesson to be learned by somebody who, quite frankly, as a professional fighter, significant portions of your life are spent, not so much mentally in the moment, but training for a fight that isn't going to happen for a few months. They spend months at a time. Everything that they do is aimed at honing their performance for a date that is far off in the future. They don't live their entire lives, in the here and now. They can't always be here and now. So when they can be here now, it's extremely important that they be able to do so. So the whole thing, it does resemble one of these ideas that just seems, shaky and squishy and not real solid, and it doesn't really have like a whole lot of what you would call real-world application. On its surface, it does seem that way. But the more that you dig into it, the more that you find that no, there is something more there. But just like I think that maybe we haven't given this idea the credit that it deserves, I would say there's probably a lot of people who definitely haven't given Cory Sandhagen, the kind of credit that he deserves.